I want to say what an honor it is and a privilege it is to be on this platform and have learned and heard from some of the greatest scholars from around the world. I really want to thank Dr. Armando and Dr. Adalberta for their warm hospitality and for bringing us all together on this platform. But I especially want to mention Daniela and Paula, their two daughters, who really help behind the scenes, and they're the ones who helped me to come here, because I met Paula in Jordan, in Amman, with Prince Hassan's discussion. I also want to thank a couple of people who may not be mentioned in this conference. There's Carla and Sylvia, who are translating up there, so I really want to thank them. And I want to thank Simonetta. I hope I'm getting your names right. My discussion and my talk will be in 3 parts, very quickly. As an anthropologist, I'll be looking at religion and culture. Number 2, I'll be looking at Islamophobia in Europe, based on a research project we did recently called Journey into Europe. And third, I'll be looking at the way forward, because so far we've talked about theory, but we haven't talked about practice. So how do practically we go ahead and form policies that are empathy-based and policies that are inclusive to women and men, as you mentioned, that very important point, and which Dr. Aziza mentioned in the morning. It's very important to include men and for them to see themselves as our friends and to go along together hand in hand. So as an anthropologist conducting ethnographic work in the heart of South Asia while studying and teaching in Europe, the US and the Middle East briefly, I teach the difference between religion and culture. And this is often merged in the media, so there's a confusion about what is religion, what is culture. For instance, take Islam, the religion of Pakistan, and especially the Pashtuns or the Pakhtuns. Yet Pakhtun culture is based on a parallel, even contradictory set of rules called Pakhtun Wali. Islam, the religion, and Pakhtun Wali, the culture, are not always in harmony with one another. Yet Pakhtun people say that they are firm Muslims. Professor Jocelyn, in her study on Islam, gender, and democracy, points to these contradictions in Muslim societies such as Egypt, Turkey, Morocco, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. There's also a serious distance between religion, which gives women rights to inherit, divorce, work, and education, and practice, which according to culture or tradition denies women the right to inherit, divorce, work, or to gain an education. The state becomes the decisive factor in women's rights. But there too, there is a huge distance between legislation and practice, where religion and the constitution gives rights to women. Local culture and practice often denies them those rights. In Pakistan, according to its constitution, Article 25A, education is free and compulsory for every male and female citizen from the ages of 5 to 16 years. But having these rights, there's still a gap between the law and practice. In this gap, Malala, you will all know, was shot, unfortunately, in the head at the age of 15, a case which Professor Jocelyn mentions in her chapter. The Taliban shot Malala, and she's from Swat, and this was in response to speaking up against them, so it was more a political situation. My book, Sorrow and Joy Among Muslim Women, published by Cambridge University Press, explores many examples of how religion and culture are not always in harmony, and one often contradicts the other in rites de passage, especially in marriage and death. My recent focus has been on exploring the great faiths of the world's most ancient religions and to look at the birth and origin in South Asia. If you look at Hinduism, Buddhism, Sikhism, most of these religions were founded in Pakistan despite its image. Often in this conference, when someone's asked me, where are you from? I say Pakistan. And they say, oh, are you safe? Are you okay? But again, this is the stereotype of the media. It tends to exaggerate and impose stereotypes on a whole community where there's just one incident. So we mustn't forget to step back and look at the whole picture. So in my new book, I'm looking at Buddhism, Hinduism, Christianity, Islam, Sikhism, Zoroastrianism, the Baha'i faith, and you'll be interested to know the Kalash. And many of you would like to maybe Google the Kalash because it's a completely unique religion. And of course, there's a Jewish community in Pakistan, which I've discovered. And yet this is one of the oldest civilizations on our planet Earth, because we have some of the civilizations from 7000 BC, which is Mehergarh and Mohenjo-daro and Taxila. I'd like you to look up some of these places and refer to them. And a lot of the religions that I'm studying at the moment preach equality, justice, and compassion, not just for themselves and their own kinds, but for humanity, especially for women. If we look at the Pakistani rabbi's statement, which he recently shared with me, he said, his name is Rabbi Aftab, which is also a Muslim name, so that's interesting. He said, a capable, intelligent, and virtuous woman, who is he who can find her? She is far more precious than jewels, and her value is far above rubies or pearls. And this is from the Proverbs 31:10. Then the Prophet of Islam, of course, forbade infanticide of girls, which was practiced in Saudi Arabian culture, and taught that heaven lay symbolically at the feet of the mother, and all women must be respected and cherished, with their full intellectual abilities, creativity, and selfhood intact. And you all know that the first Muslim was Khadija, a woman, and she proposed marriage to the Prophet Muhammad. So again, this is 7th century. So someone was mentioning that the Muslim community did not necessarily learn democracy from the West. These ideas were there in the coming of Islam in that period. Guru Nanak, you may know, who's the founder of the Sikh religion, taught that women and men are equal and kings are born from women. Despite the rules of equality and rights promoted in many religions, cultures often take away and curb those rights in, for example, rules of parda. And some of you may know that parda, which segregates women from men, predates Islam. So parda came 2,000 years before Islam in South Asia. And of course, it was because elite women were the privileged women. So they had to stay away from the sun, they had to protect themselves. So they were segregated. So it had nothing to do with the religion. But again, it was relevant to class and caste. So in my second point, I'm going to focus on immigration, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, and hatred. And how do we introduce empathy-based policies? With large-scale immigration and people from different traditional tribal regions moving to Europe, particularly via Sicily, Italy, we have the coming together of different cultures and tribal identities. In theory, at least, in what is secular Europe. I had the privilege to be part of a major research project called Journey into Europe, led by Professor Akbar Ahmad, in which we interviewed young immigrants and the mayor of Sicily in response to the most current situation. The people who come as immigrants to Europe come in a state of desperation, despair, and need. They do not necessarily come by choice of pleasure. They are often escaping war and death. Many of the immigrants are Muslims, and they have their way of life, their sense of dress, food, thinking, and so forth. Europe, we learned in our study, Journey into Europe, is also based on tribal ideas and values. And because both cultures are based on tribal identity, they tend to meet together in a headstrong way. This is what has been happening in Europe, leading to what has been called the immigration crisis. Some have said this is potential for genocide, and the Pope has even called this Third World War. And we know that women are often victims of war in wherever it is happening. Take the Rohingya, for example, or the Kashmiris, or anywhere in the world. Look at the situation of women. In this context, empathy-based policies become central. Law and government policies, too, must be empathy-based. We hear about the practice of separating Mexican immigrant mothers from their children in America, or China's state practices of taking entire generations of Uyghur children and re-educating them in Chinese national values in concentration camps. There are countless examples from around the world. So how is empathy relevant and what is it? Social scientists have termed our age the age of empathy. And as you know, this is a Greek concept. It's from empathia, or to feel with people. So empathy is different from sympathy. Sympathy is me-oriented, whereas empathy is you-oriented. But again, it's a very sophisticated concept because self-absorption, as Daniel Goleman explains, self-absorption in all its forms kills empathy. So when you're self-centered with your own community and its problems, that sort of kills that sense of respect for others, let alone compassion. When we focus on ourselves, our world contracts as our problems and preoccupations loom large. However, when we focus on others, our world expands. Our own problems drift to the periphery of the mind and so seem smaller. And we increase our capacity for connection or compassion, compassionate action. And we know that in Islam, the concept of Rahim is from Rahma, which is the womb, the woman's womb. So it's a feminine concept. So perhaps, having women in these discussions and policy could help and promote these ideas. So what is the way forward? The way forward, I would suggest, I have a couple of suggestions, are more conferences and discussions like these, but on a more public level. So we have scholars, which is wonderful, and we're discussing these ideas amongst ourselves, but what about the people on the ground, where the actual debate is happening, where there is hatred, where there is this cancer of hatred? The word I heard was the cancer of hatred. So how do we tackle that? Here are some ideas, and perhaps you may want to enhance and add a few other ideas. Our religious leaders, of course, there's debate and discussions amongst religious leaders. We've seen female rabbis, we've seen female priests, and perhaps, we know that Muslims have some of the greatest scholars who are ladies and women. Fatima al-Firsi, for example, who made the first university. And so we need to study women, but also inspire the local, the public narrative in the Muslim world. Then the media. The media is very problematic. In order to balance the negative image of minority communities, in particular Islam and Muslims, the media must focus on positives of the faith and the global community and work to bridge the divide between the West and Muslims. Such coverage will allow Muslim citizens to feel more included and less marginalized in mainstream societies. The UNESCO World Report notes the limited range of representations tends to promote the creation of stereotypes through what is often called the process of othering, whereby the media tend to fix, reduce, or simplify. Strategic information literacy is needed to eliminate stereotypes to allow audiences to become more critical when consuming media and also help to combat unilateral perspectives. So the media must work more closely with Muslim scholars and bring them into the fold to represent themselves and their own ideas, rather than inviting so-called experts who barely understand Muslims or Islam to speak for them. These so-called experts have given misleading information, which has led to serious misrepresentations of the faith and the community. So again, bridge building, knowledge, positivity, this is very important. The third point I would emphasize is youth. There's a big crisis with the youth, both in the West, but also in Muslim society. We have technology, we have confusion. Who are the leaders? Who are the role models? We need to strengthen them. If young boys, Muslims, are seeing terrorists as their representatives and their leaders, they're not going to have a good self-fulfilling prophecy. They're going to again say, this is my leader, which is not true. But if you show them positive role models, then of course they're going to live up to that idea. And then again, coexistence courses are essential. Our center, the Center for Dialogue and Action, have introduced some of these courses from the inside out, both in the United Kingdom and in Pakistan at Foreman Christian College and at other universities. And we had one student who I was telling some of my friends, he said people of other faiths are wajib al-qatl. That means they should be killed. Right in the beginning of our course. And he was a young boy. He was, from a tribal region and all. So he's arguing that people of non-Muslim faith or my faith should be killed. And so that's a very violent thing to say. But in our courses, we looked at the dialogue of civilizations. We looked at early Islam. We looked at the Prophet. We looked at gender. We looked at empathy. We looked at several interdisciplinary ideas and projects. And we found that the same boy at the end of the course said, "Ma'am, I'm completely changed. I'm not going to use violence. I'm going to use the pen, the qalam, to change my world." So these sort of discussions, but also in a formal setting at universities, at schools, this is what needs to happen much more. And of course, the project Journey into Europe is a fantastic book and documentary, and I'd like you all to have a look at that. And that's good teaching material. So combating hatred of the religious, ethnic, and gendered other is something really important, because the UN has published a work on this, which says women's rights are human rights. So again, this is what needs to be emphasized. And finally, I'd like to say that quoting Dr. Haris Salajic, who's the former Prime Minister of Bosnia-Herzegovina, whose people faced genocide 2 decades ago. He said, and please note, he said, "You are civilized if you protect weaker groups within your own society. Otherwise, you are not." So remember this quote, it's really important. Learning from past periods when different cultures lived and thrived together, as in Al-Andalus and Sicily here in Europe, and all of us need to reject all forms of religious intolerance, whether it's academic in a subtle way or in the media or the information we're taking in. Take Pope Francis's example, who in the footsteps of Francis of Assisi, known as the Alter Christus or another Christ, is the embodiment of compassion. Even in this one act of his, where he knelt down, he washed the feet of a Muslim woman and he kissed it. She was an immigrant, but he welcomed her. Muslim contributions to European civilization included algebra, medicine, and philosophy that led to the Renaissance. Muslims inspired by Al-Andalus must rediscover a love for knowledge and acceptance of the other found in a pluralist understanding of Muslimhood. And as Professor Jocelyn rightly argued, the whole concept of critical thinking is important in university, which is lacking because we have the rote system of learning. So again, that's something that needs to be studied. And I want to finally share with you the ending, in conclusion, my new project in which I have discovered a number of scholars and saints, namely Bit Shah and Waris Shah, Rumi, Guru Nanak, Jesus, people like that in these different faiths, who we could call gems, because often they're described in their books as gems or pearls. And these are the people who are selfless, they're universal, they reach out to the other, they understand the other. So at their graves, you'll find, even if it's a Muslim grave, you'll find Hindus are there, Sikhs are there. There's no difference, there's no division. They're united, they come together in this universal vision. And that again is the image of God. Whereas Rumi said you find the divine within yourself. And that's when you reach at a position where you're reaching out. So I want to finally share with you this beautiful story of Bit Shah, if I have 2 minutes. 1 minute. So if perhaps you all could do your own research. One story is Waris Shah, and he writes a beautiful story of Heer Ranja. Heer Ranja is again a Romeo and Juliet story, and another one is Bit Shah. Bit Shah is the king of the desert. And again, he's very selfless. He gives up all materialism and wealth and all, and he sits on a mountain in the desert in Sindh. And he's known as the Shakespeare of Sindh. And he wrote these beautiful romances, which are Romeo and Juliet type of stories. I don't have time to describe them. But this is the soul's spiritual journey to the divine. But again, the message is going beyond. So we're talking about dialogue, we're talking about interreligious dialogue today, where these people 300, 400 years ago in Pakistan, in Sindh, in Punjab, were writing books on these topics. And these are rich topics. Now, Shakespeare apparently has got his ideas from this region, and that's material for further study. So again, this is opposite of the Taliban pendulum. So this is something that I'm discovering and working on as a student and on this journey. And I hope to share it with you. And thank you so much for having us and for this wonderful opportunity of this conference. Thank you.